The elevator swallowed the city whole. Every floor ticked by in silence, 42, 45, 48, until the polished chrome reflected more than my coat. It reflected the life I had built in secret, the empire my family would never see coming, and the truth I had carried alone for years. Tonight, everything would change. I watched the reflection of my coat in the polished chrome doors. It was a charcoal cashmere, tailored with a precision that bordered on architectural. Underneath it, I wore a silk blouse that cost more than my first car, a rusted sedan I'd sold a decade ago to pay for a month of server space. I looked like what I was, the CEO of a company that predicted the future of human behavior. But in my mind, as the elevator slowed, I was already practicing how to look smaller. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from my mother. "Don't forget tonight, Lena. 7 o'clock. Evan has big news. Try to be on time. He's worked so hard for this." I didn't reply. I stepped out into the lobby of NeuroTrace Systems, where the floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of Chicago in late November. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the promise of the season's first real snow. Below, the Lake Michigan shoreline looked jagged and cold. "Good morning, Lena," Marcus, my head of operations, said as he fell into step beside me. He held a tablet, his eyes scanning a dashboard of real-time analytics. "The London office just closed the quarter. We're up 14% on the predictive accuracy for the retail sector. The board is asking if we can move the Series D announcement to Monday." "Not Monday," I said, my voice level. "I want the auditing finalized first. If we claim a $4 billion valuation, I want the data to be unassailable. Tell them Tuesday." "Tuesday it is," Marcus noted, scribbling a digital note. He paused at the door to my inner office. "You okay? You look focused." "Just a family dinner," I said. Marcus grinned. He knew my family thought I worked in tech support or perhaps data entry for a mid-level marketing firm. He found it hilarious. I found it necessary. "Give 'em hell," he joked. "I won't," I said, and I meant it. "I'll give them exactly what they expect." I sat at my desk, a slab of dark walnut that held nothing but a laptop and a single obsidian paperweight. For the next 8 hours, I would manage 400 employees, navigate a complex acquisition of a Berlin-based AI firm, and sign off on a healthcare initiative that would change how hospitals allocated emergency resources. But in 3 hours, I would drive to the suburbs, change into an old sweater, and become the family disappointment. Again. The drive to Arlington Heights is a transition between two worlds. As the skyline of Chicago shrinks in the rearview mirror, the scale of my life seems to shrink with it. The sprawling complexity of NeuroTrace, the global servers, the venture capitalists, the high-stakes chess of international business, recedes, replaced by the familiar, suffocating comfort of the grid-lined streets where I grew up. I pulled my SUV into the driveway of my parents' house. It's a colonial-style home, impeccably maintained, with a lawn that my father treats like a sacred monument. I sat in the car for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. Silence has a weight. For years, I used to think of it as a void, something that needed to be filled with explanations, defenses, and proofs of concept. Now I knew better. Silence was a fortress. I remembered being 19, sitting at this very dinner table, telling my parents I was dropping out of the University of Illinois. "It's a mistake, Lena," my father had said, his voice thick with a disappointment that felt like lead. "You're throwing away a stable path for, what, designing websites?" "It's not just websites, Dad," I had tried to explain. "It's about how data can map human intention. If we can code the why behind a choice, we can solve problems before they happen." "It sounds like science fiction," Clara, my sister, had chimed in. She was already in her second year of law school then, her life a series of neatly filed folders. "Real success takes credentials, Lena. You're just looking for an easy way out because you don't want to study for the LSATs." Then came the first failure. Vantage Point, my first startup. I had burnt through $40,000 of a small seed loan and 2 years of my life. When it collapsed, the family didn't gloat. They did something worse. They were understanding. "It's okay," my mother had said. patting my hand as if I were a child who had scraped a knee. "You tried your little business. Now you can get a real job at the bank. Evan's firm is hiring in the admin department." I didn't take the job at the bank. I started CoreLogic. That one lasted 18 months before a larger competitor sued us into oblivion. I lost everything. I moved into a studio apartment where the heater rattled like a dying ghost, and I ate canned soup for dinner. My family saw the bags under my eyes and the fraying cuffs of my coat, and they reached a consensus. Lena was a dreamer who lacked the grit for the real world. So, when I started NeuroTrace, I stopped talking. I stopped telling them about the breakthroughs. I stopped mentioning the investors. When the first $1 million check hit the business account, I didn't call home. When we moved from a shared workspace to a floor in the Citadel building, I told them I'd found a new position at a firm downtown. "Is it stable?" my mother had asked. "It's steady work," I had replied. It wasn't a lie. It was just a different version of the truth. I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my cheeks. I left my designer bag in the trunk and took only my phone and my keys. I walked up the path, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the fallen leaves. The house smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken. It was a scent that usually signaled safety, but tonight it felt like a thick layer of dust. "Lena, you're here," my mother said, gliding out of the kitchen to give me a brief, floral-scented hug. She pulled back, scanning my face. "You look tired. Are they working you too hard at that office?" "It's just the end of the year, Mom," I said, hanging my coat in the hall closet. I made sure to tuck the label out of sight. "Everything piles up in November." "Well, you're here now. Go into the living room. Evan just got in." The living room was dominated by the fireplace and my brother's presence. Evan was 3 years older than me, a man who wore his success like a bright neon sign. He was a senior vice president at a mid-tier logistics company, a role he had attained through a combination of genuine hard work and an unshakable belief in his own importance. "Little sister," Evan said, standing up to give me a one-armed squeeze. He was wearing a vest with his company's logo embroidered on the chest. "How's the world of? What is it you're doing now?" "Data entry." "Behavioral analytics," I corrected softly. Right, high-level spreadsheets," he teased, winking at his wife, Sarah, who sat on the sofa with a glass of Chardonnay. "Well, keep at it. Maybe in a few years, you'll work your way up to a management track. It's all about the grind." "I suppose it is," I said. I took a seat in the armchair by the window, the one that sat in the shadows. Clara arrived a few minutes later with her husband. She was now a junior partner at a reputable firm, her hair pulled back in a sharp, no-nonsense bob. She sat down and immediately began discussing the complexities of a real estate merger she was handling. "It's just the sheer volume of discovery," Clara said, sighing dramatically. "I don't think people realize the mental toll of high-level professional work. It's not like a 9-to-5 where you can just turn your brain off." She looked at me then, a flicker of pity in her eyes. "How's your commute, Lena? Still taking the L?" "Most days," I said. I didn't mention the black car service that dropped me off at the edge of the suburbs, so I could walk the last 3 blocks to maintain the illusion. "You really should look into a more reliable car," my father said, joining us with a bowl of pretzels. "I saw a nice Honda on sale in the paper. Stable, efficient, just what you need." "I'll look into it, Dad," I said. The dinner bell rang, and we migrated to the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the set they used for promotions, engagements, and Evan's various accolades. As we passed the mashed potatoes, the real reason for the dinner was revealed. "So," my father said, tapping his wine glass with a fork, "we're all here to celebrate Evan. Tell them the news, son." Evan beamed, straightening his posture. "I've been tapped for the regional director position. It comes with a 20% raise, a dedicated assistant, and a seat on the executive strategy board. It's a big deal. They only pick one person every 5 years for this track." A chorus of congratulations erupted. My mother looked like she might cry with pride. Clara leaned over to shake his hand. "That's incredible, Evan," Clara said. "That's real influence. You're finally in the room where it happens." "To Evan," my father toasted, "the high flyer of the family." I raised my glass of water. Congratulations, Evan. That's a lot of responsibility. Evan nodded at me, his expression softening into that familiar, condescending warmth. Thanks, Lena. And hey, don't feel bad. We all have our own pace. Not everyone is built for the executive suite. There's no shame in being a steady worker bee. The world needs people like you to keep the lights on while people like us steer the ship. I took a sip of water. The coldness of it felt sharp against my throat. I felt a sudden, fleeting urge to tell him. To tell him that the ship his company used for their logistics was currently running on a beta version of my software. To tell him that I had signed off on a charitable donation this morning that was larger than his new annual salary. But the urge passed as quickly as it came. If I told them, the peace would end. They would move from pity to expectation. They would ask for favors, or worse, they would start to treat me with a hollow, performative respect based on my bank account rather than my person. Silence was cleaner. So, Lena, Clara said, leaning forward, Mom mentioned you might be looking for a new apartment. The studio is a bit cramped for a woman in her 30s, isn't it? It's fine for now, I said. I'm mostly at the office anyway. She's a workaholic, my mother said, shaking her head. But for what? Lena, you need to find a career with a ceiling. You're running in circles in that tech world. It's so volatile. One day you're in, the next day the company folds. Look at what happened to your other 2 projects. I learned a lot from them, I said. Learning doesn't pay the mortgage, my father added. You need to think about the future. Maybe you could take a night course in paralegal studies. Clara could help you find a spot at her firm. It would be a fresh start, a stable one. I'll think about it, I said. I focused on the chicken. It was slightly overcooked. The conversation moved on, as it always did, to Evan's new company car and Clara's upcoming vacation to Tuscany. I sat in the middle of it, a ghost at the feast. I watched them, the way they punctuated their sentences with certainties, the way they built a world out of titles and perceived prestige. I looked at my family and realized I was a stranger to them, not because I was hiding, but because they had stopped looking years ago. They saw the 19-year-old dropout. They saw the girl with the failed business. They had written the ending of my story before I had even finished the first chapter. Lena, Sarah, Evan's wife, asked, "You're very quiet tonight." "Just listening," I said, offering a small, practiced smile. "It's a lot of big news to take in." "She's probably just overwhelmed," Evan said, reaching for the gravy. "It's a different world when you're talking about regional strategies and million-dollar budgets. It's okay to be a little starstruck, sis." I felt a vibration in my pocket, a persistent one. I ignored it, but then the phone in the kitchen began to ring. Then my father's cell phone on the sideboard chirped. Then Clara's. "What is going on?" Clara asked, reaching for her phone. "My news alerts are going crazy." I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. The Series D announcement wasn't until Tuesday. I had specifically told Marcus Tuesday. "Wait," Evan said, looking at his phone. "Is there a terrorist attack?" "No, wait. It's business news. Something about a major acquisition in the city." My father stood up and walked over to the television in the corner of the dining room. He flicked it on, the screen glowing blue before the image resolved into the local evening news. "Breaking news in the tech sector tonight," the anchor was saying. Her voice was urgent, the kind of tone reserved for blizzards or political scandals. Chicago-based NeuroTrace Systems has just announced a record-breaking Series D funding round, valuing the company at an estimated $4.2 billion. This makes it the most valuable private AI firm in the Midwest. The table went silent. Evan's fork hovered halfway to his mouth. "NeuroTrace," Clara whispered. "Wait, isn't that the company you—" She looked at me, her brow furrowing. "No, you said you worked for a marketing firm." "I said I worked in behavioral analytics," I said quietly. My heart was beginning to hammer against my ribs. On the screen, a graphic appeared with the NeuroTrace logo, a stylized blue eye made of data points. "The company's founder and CEO," the anchor continued, "has remained largely out of the public eye until today's announcement. But moments ago, the company released a statement regarding their acquisition of the German firm, Ethelgard." The screen shifted. A photo appeared. It was a professional headshot taken 6 months ago. In the photo, I wasn't wearing an old sweater. I was wearing the charcoal cashmere coat, my hair sleek, my eyes fixed on the camera with a level of cold, terrifying clarity that I usually reserved for board meetings. Underneath the photo, the caption read, Lena Carter, founder and CEO, NeuroTrace Systems. The silence in the dining room wasn't just quiet. It was a physical weight. It was the sound of a vacuum seal breaking. My father turned around slowly, his hand still holding the remote. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. Lena, he asked. His voice was thin, stripped of its usual paternal authority. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. 4.2 billion, Evan said, his voice cracking. He looked at his phone, then at the TV. That's not possible. That's a mistake. Lena, is that a different Lena Carter? It's me, Evan, I said. My voice was calm, but it felt like it was coming from a great distance. But you take the L, my mother said, her face pale. She sat down heavily in her chair. You wear those old sweaters. You said it was a little project. I never said it was a little project, Mom, I said softly. You did. I just didn't correct you. Clara was staring at the TV, her eyes scanning the scrolling text at the bottom of the screen. You acquired Ethelgard. I spent 3 weeks reviewing their patent filings for a client. They're a global powerhouse. And you bought them. On Thursday, I said. The news must have leaked early. I wanted to wait until next week. Wait, Evan said, his face reddening. If you're the CEO, if you have that kind of money, why the hell have you been sitting here letting us talk to you like I was a failure? I finished for him. Evan winced. The regional director, title he had been so proud of 5 minutes ago now, seemed like a plastic gold star on a child's drawing. We were just worried about you, my father said, though he didn't sound convinced. He looked at the TV again, where my face was still being broadcast to the city. We thought you were struggling. Why didn't you tell us? Why would you let your own family think you were? That you were nothing? I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the confusion, the dawning shame, and the strange, new flicker of fear in his eyes. He didn't know how to talk to me anymore. The hierarchy of the family, the one he had spent 30 years building, had been vaporized in a single news segment. Because, I said, and for the first time in years, the restraint slipped just a fraction. Every time I tried to tell you who I was, you told me who you wanted me to be. You wanted me to be the cautionary tale. You wanted me to be the one who needed your advice, your stability, your pity. It made you feel safe to have me at the bottom. That's not true, my mother whispered, though she wouldn't look me in the eye. Isn't it? I asked. Evan, you just told me the world needs people like me to keep the lights on so people like you can steer the ship. You needed me to be a worker bee so you could be the pilot. I just let you keep the dream alive. I stood up. The movement was fluid, practiced. I felt the weight of the CEO back in my shoulders. Where are you going? My father asked. I have a lot of phone calls to make, I said. The leak wasn't supposed to happen tonight. My PR team is probably panicking. Lena, wait, Clara said, standing up. We should celebrate. This is incredible. I had no idea you were so influential. I looked at her. I was influential yesterday, Clara. I was influential a year ago. I was the same person when I walked into this house 2 hours ago. The only thing that changed is that you can finally see the numbers. I walked into the hallway and retrieved my coat. I put it on, the cashmere soft against my skin. Lena, my mother said, following me. She looked small in the doorway of the kitchen. Are you coming for Christmas? I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I looked at the house, the floral wallpaper, the good china, the world of small certainties and gentle dismissals. I don't know, Mom, I said. I'll have my assistant check my schedule. I stepped out into the night. The snow had finally begun to fall. Large, heavy flakes drifted down from the Chicago sky, settling on the suburban lawns and the silent cars. I walked to my SUV, the cold air feeling like a benediction. My phone was glowing in my hand. 42 missed calls, 115 texts. The world was screaming for my attention. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The dashboard lit up. a sophisticated array of sensors and data. I looked at the house one last time. Through the dining room window, I could see them, 4 figures frozen around a table, staring at a television screen as if it were an alien artifact. They didn't see me. They saw the image of me. And I realized then that they always would. I shifted the car into reverse and backed out of the driveway. As I turned onto the main road, heading back toward the glowing spikes of the city skyline, the tension that had lived in my chest for a decade finally began to dissolve. Success wasn't the valuation. It wasn't the acquisition or the charcoal coat. Success was the moment I realized I didn't need them to understand what I had built. I had built it in the dark, and it had grown strong enough to stand in the light without their permission. I reached the highway, the wheels humming against the pavement. The city ahead was a grid of light and shadow, a map of a million choices. I accelerated, merging into the flow of the night, a silent force moving through a world that was finally and irrevocably awake. I was no longer the girl who had dropped out. I was no longer the girl who had failed. I was the architect of the future, and for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't a fortress. It was peace. If you loved this, hit subscribe for more.